Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast, where we help construction executives lead high-performing teams that finish on time and under budget without all the firefighting and babysitting, so you can lead with focus and control. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. Now, today you are in for a treat because Jon Vaughan is joining me on the show to have a conversation talking about leadership when a client of ours had an executive and was struggling to coach up and improve another fellow executive. And when I have hairy situations like this, I go to Jon Vaughan. Jon was a third generation owner of Brand Vaughan Lumber Company. He sold out a few years ago to US LBM. He's an all-around smart guy and wonderful person. So as I'm thinking about culture and leadership and profitability and deal making, what's happening in our industry, both on the residential side and commercial side, he's tapped into all of that. So without further ado, let's dive in. As always, thank you for listening. Jon, is it different when you are coaching up an executive for improved performance compared to maybe anyone else down throughout the organization?
Absolutely. In a lot of cases and a lot of points of it, it's night and day. I'll kind of set the foundation for how you try to coach up folks further down in the organizational chart. A lot of times they see the need for improvement in order to get to that next level. And so the stakes when you're bringing constructive criticism or coaching or gaps or blind spots, I mean, they're expecting it. And the risk in doing it is more on the how of the approach than the approach in general, because there's just a lot of opportunity for them to see their career moving up, their role expanding, their compensation expanding, et cetera. Versus when you're trying to coach up an executive, they're already in a spot. Most likely they've been in the industry for a long time. They've been in the position for a longer period of time or a similar position in different organizations. And so when you're approaching it, the risk side is much higher because they start to feel like in this role, my impact is greater and more pointed. And so if my boss, who is probably the CEO or the president or the chairman, is bringing coachable moments to me, it's probably higher stakes. It means that this CEO president is expecting a lot out of me in this executive role. And if I don't make these changes, is my role in danger? Now, I know a lot of great servant leaders. I know a bunch of great humble leaders, but even great humble, great servant leaders have egos that kind of catapult them into this role. And so they've been coached up over time. So they feel like by the time I get to this, I'm just sanding edges. I'm not necessarily coming into a situation where I need a full scale improvement in communication or marketing or individual coaching of other people or execution on or strategic performance or strategic ideas. And so when you go to somebody at that level and you start to push back on or give coachable opportunities, a lot of times they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is a different dynamic than I was thinking about. And particularly if it reduces anybody's realm of influence or responsibility, at that level of an executive, usually they feel an ownership of that piece of responsibility. So anything that feels like you're taking something away feels like a demotion. On the other side is where everything looks like opportunity. Any sort of change in that area feels like a demotion in some level, even if it's not truly that.
So if anyone's listening here now and they're looking around at that executive leadership level and seeing that, hey, I like this individual, we need to help them elevate their game overall to help us achieve the goals that we want to. If listeners are in that scenario or they're imagining they will be in that scenario in the future, what might be on the list of things not to do? You'd say, listen, you mentioned before we flipped the mics on, I've done it well, I've done it poorly. Let's think about some of your failures, Jon. Those are where I like to start, just to bring your own ego down a little bit. Are you a guest on an incredibly large show? Yes. Have you done a good job in the past? Yes. But let's just bring it down a notch. Let's try to bring us, down to the same level here. What would be on the list of things not to do to ultimately say, hey man, I can tell you how to do it wrong. Do this.
I can give you a list of names and numbers and they'll tell you how poorly I've did this. Fortunately, I've been able to recover with most of them. But more often than not, when you're coming into it with a game plan to say, this is how I want you to improve, that's really kind of the first strike in those conversations, usually, rather than it being collaborative, is coming in with a plan to say, hey, Bradley, these are areas that you need to be better. More often than not, executive level, if you ask them, hey, how do you feel like we're doing in this? They're going to be more honest than and say, hey, I feel like we're maybe not hitting the bullseye in this area. Let's talk about how to do it better. Versus when you're coming in and being like, Bradley, we're really struggling in this area that you're responsible for. We need to fix it. So when you're coming in with that like prescriptive side of it, on the flip side is coming in and being overly vague. My favorite saying is clarity is kindness. And so when you're coming in and you're kind of like, Bradley, how we been doing in this area? Our sales, do you feel like sales are going pretty well? And if you're like, yeah, I feel like they're okay. And, maybe I can have some refined edges. I'm like, yeah. I really feel like we need to improve in this area, but how do we do that well? You can walk away and you may be like, well, we may need to improve a little bit. But in my seat, I'm like, man, that was hard, but I told him he needs to be better.
Yes.
So that lack of clarity is one of the pitfalls to fall into. And the third is the follow-up. When I didn't do this, always got me in trouble, is following up with an email. Hey, Bradley, really enjoyed our conversation today. My takeaways from our conversation was this. Otherwise, you come back 3 weeks, a month, 6 weeks later. Hey, how'd you do in fixing the issues that we talked about? Well, what do you mean? I just felt like I was going to improve and try to help this area. But there's no prescriptive way to go about it or no follow-up. So lack of clarity, lack of follow-up, and going in with a rigid game plan are kind of the three pitfalls to not step into.
Love it. Are there things that you would advise long before? And you'd say, Bradley, if you are an executive and you feel some tension and some conflict, you've tried to address this, their performance isn't there. Now you're both kind of in this weird thing where you're both not feeling great, but there's no real clarity on where to go next. You might say, Bradley, if you're facing this problem now, the problem's probably started a year ago. How do you set those expectations? Because the phrase that I wrote down is, and maybe not unreasonably so, for people at a certain level, they do feel like they're a finished product. If you're at that age, you're probably between 45 and 60, and you've been through a lot and you've had a lot of success. And that's why we've hired you and paying you a lot of money and having a lot of responsibility. That line about just sanding the edges, are there things you can do ahead of time where you might just say, do I have permission down the line to approach it? And this is the way I normally do it. And this is what it sounds like. And this is how I approached it. And I won't name names, but this happened 6 months ago with one of your colleagues and we're stronger for it. Are there any sort of like best practices where you can foreshadow what shouldn't be all that surprising? You're gonna have to work together in a different way to get better results.
Yeah, I think it's setting the expectations on the front side of the role. Hey, and in our organization, this is how we're going to behave. And what that means is transparency early on when we see things that were not exactly in line with our strategy, with our culture, with our results. And so we want to move the pile while it's small, and bad news doesn't get better with time. So if we use those kind of as our mantras, then we're going to be able to address any conversations or concerns or challenges early. And I want you to reciprocate that with me, right? If there's a pile, move it while it's small. Come to me, let's talk about it. And so that we can address it that quickly. And if you feel like you're not performing, you don't have the resources, you don't have the support from me, whatever the case may be, that's not going to get easier later. Just bring it to me.
I love that language. Move the pile while it's small. Any advice for people that are listening and they're nodding along and they're saying, yeah, this totally makes sense. I can do that. However, here's the deal. Part of our culture is we're very, very nice, Jon. We're kind people. We even go as far to say things like we're a family here. We really care, and it's negatively impacting all of us in one way, shape, or form, more than likely monetarily. But everyone's just literally too nice to really bring up the message. Any advice for that situation?
So we use the language around the difference in being nice and being kind. You said both of them there in that.
Okay.
And to me, what I describe that is being nice is not hurting anybody's feelings ever and being really likable.
Okay.
Being kind is telling people when they're not performing early so that they have the opportunity to fix it. Because I can be nice to you for 6 months while in the meantime, I'm building a case in my mind that you're not working and then I fire you and you're like, what the heck happened?
That's a thing.
Versus being kind, which is, Bradley, we're struggling in some of these areas. I really feel like we need to improve this. I'm going to be kind by telling you that you're not performing the way that I expect so that the next conversation is easier. I mean, that's another one that a really good friend of mine told me early on that was super helpful for me. It's called the hard, easy conversation. If I have that hard conversation first, the next conversation is easy. So if I have the hard conversation that, hey, we're not performing in these ways and we need to be better at this, and the next conversation is easy either way. It's either we talked about this, we were very clear about what the expectations are and the next steps are. I'm sorry this is not working out. Or we talked about this, we set what the expectations are. You did a great job. Let's move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'll run this tool by you that in this situation, much smaller business, under $15 million business. And this conversation is where this came from. And I had asked him about how do we set expectations? What was in the contract? What was that agreement? And we realized both sides, there's a lot of ambiguity. We have this template we call the GAP model. It's top 4 goals, super clear. The A stands for activities. Where do I expect you to spend your time? What percentage of that time and what should the outcomes be? And then basically, what's the personal plan of accountability, which is what's the number one or a couple things you're going to do over the next 90 days. They didn't really have anything like that. We put that in place. Now, the ending, not great for them, but both sides really increased clarity at that executive level, maybe at a much larger organization. Could that work? Would you recommend something different? I'm always thinking about, all right, what's a tool that can help us format this in a way that's easier to do than just, all right, I got to have the hard conversation. And you're like, well, I don't want to have that anyway. And now I'm like, what do I do? And what do I do? Well, I asked Claude and hope Claude's on today. You know, that's what I'm hoping.
Well, I think that model feels like something that would be very useful at multiple different stages of size and scale, something to that effect. Because as long as there's clarity around, like if I'm asking an executive what activities you're doing and what percentage of your time are you spending on it, the larger the organization, the less that probably is meaning I feel like I have the right person in place.
Right.
But however it is that you set expectations and then measure the result of it, because what's measured is improved over and over again. And so being able to both align your incentives with what you want your outcomes to be, and then be really clear and report it often is the way to be able to make sure that this aligns. Because like you said, you don't want to get to that hard conversation. A lot of times, if you have some sort of dashboard like that, that executive is going to see it before you even have the conversation in order to be able to identify what the challenge is. And what I also probably, I'm just assuming what I know about you and about your GAP model, there's probably a really cool logo that you've created that goes with it that really identifies, if you're looking at the logo, what we're trying to do here.
You know what? That's interesting you bring that up. There is not. There are some graphics entailed. I feel like you've brought up an opportunity for me to improve, which is always exciting. Do need more logos floating around. But thanks, John. Before we, the slides off the edge, right before, the finish line here, anything else on this topic that we haven't touched upon that you might say, hey, here's one other thing to reinforce, or maybe we've said it, let me double down on it, or this hasn't been brought up. The reason I'm asking, my anecdotal experience is it's a pretty quick trigger. If you realize an executive isn't working, the idea that we would work with him or her to coach up, to change behavior, and to say, I'm not giving up on this. I don't want you to either. I feel most of the time it's what you alluded to, which is we started thinking about this and talking behind his back 9 months ago. And now we're going to let him go because it's like no one really believes that we can coach up an executive. But I think the best executives have gotten to the place where they want that feedback. They're concerned about self-deception. And, there's always switching costs involved in organizations.
Yeah, I think the two things that I would add is one is more of a reinforcement. Do it earlier than later. If you see these things, give them the opportunity to improve and be clear and give them the runway and give them a level of belief that they can do it. You put them in this role because you believe they can do the role. Continue to give that belief until you are absolutely sure that they're not capable of doing it. And the other thing that I'd encourage you, we've talked about the strategy side, the tactic side of it. Then there's the human side of it is after the meeting, what is it going to feel like if I was in his or her shoes? And what would my reaction be? And then go meet them where they are the next day, the next week. Hey, Bradley, I know that was a hard conversation. I appreciate you being willing to be vulnerable and authentic with me in that moment. How you doing? Because I don't want this to get off the rails. Because if you don't have any level of human follow-up compassion in that side, then I can promise you it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, every time we talk, we dance around at some point, and you often bring it up, the fundamental attribution error. The first question is, if this performance we've seen, does it deviate from what we've seen before? And is it possible they're fighting some other battle, maybe personally, right? Maybe with their family, maybe inside their own head, that is potentially temporary in nature that they might not want to disclose? And is it possible that's it? And then you're dealing with something completely different versus, man, we really thought this guy would be good, understanding a balance sheet and managing it accordingly. We have learned that is not true, right? Is it one of those skills, or is this something maybe just is the hairy side of, managing kids and families and aging parents and whatever, all the other stuff that we got to deal with?
Yeah. That fundamental attribution error is something that comes into play all the time. So being aware of it is key number one.
All right then, friend, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Jon Vaughan. As you can tell, I always enjoy talking to him. He's very active on LinkedIn, so if you would like to, he loves false or sincere flattery, and he loves kind of sharing his insights and engaging with other smart people in our construction industry. So don't hesitate to reach out to him directly on LinkedIn. All right, friend, that's all I've got. You're owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.